I never wanted to step foot inside Blackridge Asylum again. But when my supervisor at the Historical Preservation Society assigned me the task of cataloguing its remaining artifacts, I had no choice. The place had been abandoned for decades, left to rot on the outskirts of town. Locals whispered about the horrors that had taken place within its walls, experimental treatments, missing patients, and, of course, the infamous seventh door. I told myself it was just a building. Bricks and wood, nothing more. Yet, as I pushed open the rusted gates, I felt an immediate chill, like the asylum itself was exhaling against my skin. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. My flashlight flickered against peeling wallpaper and shattered furniture. The asylum was a skeleton of its former self, its silence oppressive. My job was simple: photograph relics, take notes, and avoid getting spooked. But something about this place made my hands tremble as I flipped through my checklist. Then I saw it. At the end of a long, dim hallway stood a row of doors, each numbered in fading paint. 1, 2, 3. My eyes followed the sequence. 4, 5, 6. And then I stopped. There should have been a seventh door. But where I expected to see the number 7, I saw nothing. Just a blank section of wall where the seventh door should have been. A nervous chuckle escaped my lips. Maybe the stories were exaggerated. Maybe the door never existed at all. I turned back toward the main lobby, deciding to finish my work as quickly as possible. Then I heard it. A faint knock. I froze. The sound had come from behind me. From the empty wall, another knock, louder this time. My breath hitched as I stepped backward. My flashlight flickered as the knocking turned into pounding. Desperate, urgent. My pulse pounded in my ears. It's just the wind. Just the building settling. I repeated the words in my head like a prayer. But then, I heard something else. A whisper. A voice, muffled yet chillingly clear. Let me out. My blood turned to ice, the pounding grew more erratic, and I swore I saw something, a shadow pressing against the wall, like a figure trapped just behind the surface that I bolted. I didn't stop until I reached the entrance, my chest heaving. The asylum was silent once more. No knocking. No voice. Just the empty hallway stretching behind me. I should have left. I should have quit right then and there, but something wouldn't let me. Because as I turned to leave, I caught sight of something scratched into the dust-covered floor. A message left behind by someone before me. It read, "Do not open seventh door." I stared at the warning etched into the dust-covered floor, my pulse hammering. Do not open the seventh door. But there was no door. Just a blank stretch of wall where one should have been. A rational voice in my head screamed for me to leave. But another part of me, the part that had always been drawn to the unexplainable, wanted answers. The asylum had been abandoned for over 50 years. Who had written that warning? And why did it look so fresh, as if scrawled only moments ago? I forced myself to take a breath, pulling my phone from my pocket. If I was going to investigate, I needed to document everything. I snapped a picture of the wall where the seventh door should have been and then lowered the camera to capture the warning on the floor. That's when I saw them, footprints, not mine. A trail of bare, wet footprints leading away from the blank wall, disappearing into the shadows of the hallway. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around my flashlight. There was no sign of water anywhere. No leaks, no puddles. And yet, the prints looked fresh, as if someone had just been standing there. Then the air changed. It became thicker, like the asylum itself was pressing in on me. My ears filled with a distant whispering, words too faint to understand. The sound wasn't coming from one place, it was everywhere, surrounding me, breathing against my skin. I shivered and turned back toward the entrance. I'd seen enough for the night. That's when I heard it again. A voice soft, almost pleading. Please. I whipped around, my flashlight shaking. The hallway was empty, and then, a gust of air brushed past me. Cold. Damp. Like something unseen had just rushed by. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my flashlight. The whispering grew louder, rising and falling like a chorus of voices layered over one another. I could almost make out words, but before I could focus, a single sound shattered through the whispers. A door creaking open slow. Heavy. Right behind me. But that wasn't possible. There were no doors in this part of the hall, only the blank wall where the seventh door should have been. My breath caught in my throat as I turned. And I saw it, where there had been only an empty wall seconds ago, now stood a door. A wooden door. Aged. Rotting. Numbered 7. The handle twitched, as if someone on the other side was trying to open it. Then, the whispers stopped. And in the crushing silence that followed, I heard one final sound at a click. The door had just unlocked itself. The click echoed through the corridor like a gunshot. The air shifted, growing heavier, colder. I didn't move. I couldn't. My eyes locked onto the door that shouldn't exist, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. A door had just materialized in front of me. A door I had been warned not to open. But something wanted me to. The brass handle twitched again. A slow, deliberate movement, then, tap, tap, tap. Fingernails, raking against the wood from the other side. I took a step back, heart pounding so hard it hurt. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body refused to listen, and then, the handle turned. I stumbled back, my shoes scraping against the dusty floor. The door creaked open an inch, revealing nothing but pitch-black darkness beyond. No flicker of light. No hint of what lay inside then. Something reached out. A hand, or what should have been one. The fingers were longer than they should be. Too many joints, the skin grey and wrinkled, like it had been soaking in water for days. The nails were cracked, yellowed, sharpened to points. And the worst part, it was reaching for me. I snapped out of my trance and stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. My flashlight flickered, the beam shaking wildly as I aimed it at the door. The hand recoiled instantly, slithering back into the darkness like a spider retreating into its web. The door slammed shut with a thunderous bang silence. Only my ragged breathing filled the empty corridor, then, scratching, slow, deliberate. Something was carving into the wood from the other side. I forced my trembling hands to lift the flashlight, illuminating the door's surface. My stomach lurched as I watched letters appear, as if an unseen hand was dragging a claw across the rotted wood. I see you and why vision blurred as nausea twisted my gut then. Footsteps, not from inside the door. From behind me I spun around, my flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. Nothing, but I wasn't alone, that I could feel it. Something was watching me. Breathing. Waiting. The whispering returned, a symphony of voices hissing in my ears. Closer this time. Urgent. Desperate. Leave. Now. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned on my heel and bolted down the hallway, my footsteps echoing through the asylum as I reached the exit. One final sound followed me. A voice. Low. Guttural. Amused. You already opened it. And then, laughter. I didn't stop running until I reached the asylum's front entrance. The massive wooden doors loomed ahead, cracked and rotting, their iron handles coated in rust. I lunged for them, shoving with all my strength. They didn't budge. My pulse thundered in my ears. I tried again, gripping, pulling, slamming my shoulder into the wood. Nothing. The door was locked. I whirled around, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The hallway behind me stretched into darkness, its gaping maw swallowing the weak glow of my flashlight. The laughter had stopped. The whispering had gone silent, but the feeling hadn't. I was not alone. Shoving down the rising panic, I reached into my pocket for my phone. I had to call someone, anyone. My fingers closed around the cold metal, and I yanked it out, my hands trembling to no service. My stomach sank. A sharp sting bloomed on my wrist. I winced, dropping the flashlight in my panic. The beam tumbled wildly across the floor, casting erratic shadows against the peeling walls. I lifted my arm, eyes widening. Something was on my skin. A symbol. Carved into my wrist, as if scratched by an unseen hand, was a jagged, circular mark. The skin around it was raw, but there was no blood, only a deep, blackened etching, pulsing faintly under the surface. A burning sensation spread through my veins. Panic tightened around my throat. I scrubbed at the mark with my sleeve, my fingers digging into my skin, but it wouldn't fade. It felt like it was sinking deeper then. From the hallway, I heard it tap. Tap, tap. The sound of nails dragging across the walls. I grabbed the flashlight and swung it toward the noise. A shadow stood at the far end of the corridor. Tall, thin, motionless. The figure was barely visible, a silhouette against the blackness, but I could see the outline of its twisted limbs and elongated fingers. And its eyes point two pinpricks of light. Watching me, it tilted its head. A slow, unnatural movement, then it stepped forward. I staggered back, my breath hitching in my throat. The thing moved wrong, its joints bending in ways they shouldn't, its footsteps silent against the floor. My flashlight flickered violently. The shadow figure was closer. I didn't see it move. It had just shifted. A whisper slithered through the air. "You are marked." A wave of nausea crashed over me. The mark on my wrist burned hotter, like something was trying to burrow into my skin. I turned and ran, my vision swimming, the corridor stretching endlessly before me. Behind me, the whispers followed. Growing louder, closer. I wasn't getting out of here. I didn't stop running. My feet pounded against the decayed floorboards, breath hitching, heart slamming against my ribs. The asylum corridors twisted like a labyrinth, endless and wrong. Hallways I hadn't seen before stretched before me, while doors that should have led to familiar rooms opened into black voids. I risked a glance behind me. The figure was gone. But the whispers remained, slithering through the walls, curling around my ears. "You are marked. The door awaits." I clutched my wrist. The symbol burned like embers beneath my skin. It had spread slightly, branching out like cracks in porcelain. I had to find a way out. Rounding a corner, I skidded to a halt. A single oil lantern flickered at the far end of the hall, casting long, distorted shadows. It shouldn't have been there. Someone had lit it. Against every ounce of instinct screaming at me to turn back, I moved forward, drawn to the weak glow like a moth to a dying flame. As I stepped closer, my flashlight sputtered, then died completely. I was left in the lantern's dim glow, and that's when I saw it. Beneath the lantern, scratched into the rotting floorboards, was a map. A jagged, hand-drawn layout of the asylum. My stomach twisted. It wasn't just a blueprint of the building. There were markings. Red lines crisscrossed the corridors, symbols etched at random intervals, as if someone had been tracking something moving through the asylum. Near the bottom of the map, my breath caught. The seventh door was marked in thick, black ink, and beside it, a message was carved deep into the wood: "Do not open." A cold shudder ran through me. Before I could process it, something dripped onto the map. I froze at a single drop of blood. I lifted my gaze. Hanging directly above me was a gaping hole in the ceiling. The wood splintered, peeling away as if something had been ripped through. The exposed beams stretched into darkness. Something shifted up there. I held my breath. A wet, ragged inhale echoed down from the hole, and then a single hand emerged. It was thin, elongated, with nails like blackened claws. It gripped the edge of the broken ceiling, fingers twitching. A second hand followed slowly. Something began to crawl down, and my pulse froze. I didn't wait. I grabbed the lantern and ran. The whispers swelled behind me, the asylum walls groaning, shifting. The corridors weren't the same anymore. And then, up ahead, a door, the seventh door. It stood at the end of the hallway, waiting. The markings from the map burned in my mind. "Do not open." But something was coming. Something was right behind me. I had no choice, and my trembling fingers grasped the handle, and I pushed it open. The door creaked open, the sound splitting through the air like a dying gasp. Cold, stale air rushed past me, carrying the scent of damp rot and something metallic, something that reeked of blood. I didn't have time to hesitate. I stepped inside and slammed the door shut behind me. Darkness swallowed me whole. I pressed my back against the door, my breath ragged. Whatever was behind me, the thing that had crawled down from the ceiling, it was out there now. Not in here, but I wasn't alone. My fingers fumbled for my flashlight, but it refused to turn on. The only source of light was the dim lantern still clutched in my other hand, its weak glow barely illuminating the room. I raised it slowly. The walls were covered in drawings. Hundreds, maybe thousands of them, scrawled in what looked like black ink, or something worse. Figures with hollow eyes. Faces twisted in silent screams. Symbols I couldn't understand. And in the center of the room, a single wooden chair. Someone was sitting in it. I swallowed hard. The figure didn't move. Their head hung low, chin pressed against their chest. Their arms dangled at their sides, long and limp, and my entire body screamed at me to turn back, but I took a step forward. "Hello." My voice was barely a whisper, and a response. I inched closer, the lantern's glow stretching over the figure's body. The air was thick with decay, and my stomach churned. The person was wearing a patient's gown, identical to the one I had seen in the old asylum records. The number 7 was stitched into the fabric, and my pulse spiked. The realization hit me all at once. This was the 7th patient. The one no records could explain. The one who had disappeared. I should have left, but something compelled me forward. My fingers trembled as I reached out. I barely brushed their shoulder when their head snapped up and I stumbled back, the lantern almost slipping from my grasp. Their face. God, their face. Skin stretched too tight, lips dry and cracked. Their eyes were wide but completely hollow, 2 empty pits staring straight through me. A slow, rattling breath escaped their mouth. Then they whispered, "You shouldn't be here." My blood turned to ice. Their body jerked violently, limbs spasming as if being pulled by unseen strings. And then, without warning, they lunged. I barely had time to react. The lantern fell from my hand, plunging the room into darkness, and the last thing I heard before everything went black was the sound of the door locking itself behind me. Darkness swallowed everything. I hit the floor hard, my hands scraping against rough concrete. A sharp, cold pain shot through my palm, and I realized I had landed on something sharp. Glass. The lantern had shattered. Its last embers of light died out, leaving me in absolute blackness. And I wasn't alone. The 7th patient was still here, and I could hear them, breathing. Wet, ragged gulps of air. Their presence felt wrong, unnatural, like the very air around them refused to settle. Then the breathing changed. Tea turned into a whisper. "They put me here, and left me to rot." I pushed myself backward, my heart hammering. My fingers scraped along the wall, searching for anything. A doorknob, a handle, anything to get out. Nothing, only cold, damp stone. They thought they could forget me. The whisper moved. 1 second, it was in front of me. The next, right beside my ear. But the walls remember. I lunged to my feet, pressing my back against the wall. My breaths came sharp and fast. Then a light flickered on, not from the lantern, not from my flashlight. The room itself glowed pale, sickly yellow light seeped from the cracks in the walls, revealing everything. I was standing in a cell. A real one. Unlike the others I had seen outside, this wasn't abandoned or crumbling. Tea was lived in. The bed was still made. The floor still swept. And the walls. My stomach lurched. The walls weren't just covered in drawings. They were etched with scratches. Claw marks. Dozens. No, hundreds of them. That a single phrase was carved over and over again. "Let me out. You see now, don't you?" I turned. The patient was standing now. Their hollow, sunken eyes bore into me. Their mouth twisted into a grin. "I never left this place." I pressed myself harder against the wall. "And now, neither will you." The light flickered. And then everything started shaking. The walls groaned. The floor trembled beneath my feet. The air thickened, pressing against my chest like an unseen force pushing me down. The room itself was closing in. I had to move. Now that I spun toward the door, slamming my fists against it. It wouldn't budge. The patient's voice turned into a low, guttural laugh. "They built this room for me, you know. A special place. A place that no one could leave." I grabbed the shattered glass from the floor, gripping it so tightly I felt my skin split. I didn't care that I raised it, aiming for the door's keyhole, and stabbed. The moment the glass touched the metal, the room collapsed, and suddenly, I was falling. I hit the ground hard. Too hard. The air was ripped from my lungs as I landed on my side, the impact rattling my bones. My vision blurred for a moment, and a sharp, stinging pain burned along my arm. The glass shard was still in my grip. For a few seconds, I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Then I forced myself to sit up. The room above me was gone. No ceiling. No door. Just a yawning black abyss stretching endlessly upward. I had fallen somewhere deeper, somewhere worse. The ground beneath me was wet. Not water. Something thicker. Sticky. I could feel it soaking through my clothes, clinging to my skin. My stomach twisted. I didn't want to know what it was. I reached for my flashlight, but when I clicked it on, the beam barely cut through the dense fog curling around me. The light was weak, flickering, as if something in the air itself was draining it. Then, I heard it whisper, "No one leaves." I spun around. Nothing. Just shifting shadows, moving unnaturally through the mist. Watching. Waiting. I needed to move. I forced myself to stand, wincing as my muscles screamed in protest. The air was heavy down here, thick with the scent of rot and decay. I could barely breathe, and then I saw them, the faces lining the walls, half buried in the stone. Some were frozen in screams, their mouths locked open in silent agony. Others had hollow, sunken eyes, watching me. Their skin was fused with the rock, as if the asylum itself had swallowed them. My breath hitched. The seventh door was never an exit, the voice whispered. It was a sentence. The realization hit me like ice in my veins. This wasn't just a hidden floor, it was a tomb. Something brushed against my ankle. I jumped back, shining my flashlight downward. A hand. Rotting, skeletal fingers reaching up from the sludge-covered floor. I ran. The ground beneath me was uneven, shifting with every step like I was running over something alive. The whispers turned into screams, echoing through the walls, the faces writhing, straining to pull free. Then, up ahead, a door, not just any door. A massive iron gate, rusted and covered in deep claw marks. Someone, or something, had tried to break through and failed. I didn't have a choice. I lunged for it, gripping the icy handle and pulling with everything I had. The metal groaned, resisting, fighting back. Then, a hand grabbed my wrist. Ice cold. Strong. Unrelenting. I screamed, and the door slammed open. A rush of darkness swallowed me whole, and I was falling again. I was falling, but it wasn't like before. This time, the air felt thick, almost like I was being pulled instead of dropped. My flashlight was gone, ripped from my grasp, leaving me in total darkness, and then, I stopped, not with an impact. Not with pain, just stopped. I opened my eyes. I wasn't on the floor, I was suspended. Hanging in the air like the asylum itself was deciding what to do with me, and below me, I saw it. A massive chamber, impossibly large, stretching endlessly in all directions. The walls weren't just stone anymore. They pulsed, breathed. Like the asylum was alive. The center, rising from the ground like a grotesque altar, stood a twisted, writhing mass of veins, tendrils, and something worse. Something that shouldn't exist, and in the middle of it all, a chair, no, a throne, and something sat in it. My breath caught. Was Dr. Ashford. His body was deteriorated, his once pristine coat stained with something black and slick. His face was barely recognizable, stretched and elongated, as if he had been molded into the throne itself. His hands were fused to the armrests, the veins of the asylum running through him. His lips parted, but it wasn't him speaking. "Welcome home." The words came from everywhere. The walls. The floor. The faces embedded in the stone. I tried to move, to struggle, but I was held in place, not by chains. By the asylum's will. Dr. Ashford's head tilted, his empty eye sockets fixing on me. "You were chosen," the voice continued. "You opened the seventh door. You accepted your fate." I shook my head violently. No, I didn't." "Yes, you did." And suddenly, memories flooded my mind, not just mine. The asylum's, every patient who had ever been trapped here, every soul who had screamed for freedom, every doctor, every nurse, every victim, absorbed into Blackridge, and now, it wanted me, too. "You belong here now." The veins lashed out, wrapping around my arms, my legs, my throat, pulling me down. I screamed, thrashing, but I couldn't escape. I wasn't strong enough, and then, a sound. A whisper. Not from the asylum, from me. A voice inside my head. "Break the cycle." My fingers twitched. Something cold pressed against my palm, the glass shard. I had held onto it this whole time. The only thing in this place not part of the asylum. My heart pounded. Had one chance. One move left. I gripped the shard, and plunged it into my own chest. Pain exploded through my body. A searing, all-consuming agony. The glass shard buried itself deep in my chest, and for a moment, I thought I had made a mistake. Then, the asylum screamed, not Dr. Ashford. Not the voices in the walls. The asylum itself, the veins recoiled, twisting and thrashing as if they were burning. The tendrils gripping my body snapped apart, freeing me from their grasp. I dropped to the floor, gasping for breath, blood seeping through my fingers as I clutched the wound. But I wasn't dead. The asylum was, cracks splintered through the walls, through the faces embedded in them. The massive, pulsing chamber shuddered, its foundation trembling. The throne of flesh and veins collapsed in on itself, and Dr. Ashford, if he had ever truly been himself, let out a long, hollow wail. "No, you don't understand." The voice, his voice, was fading. "This place needs you." I forced myself to my feet, stumbling toward the only exit I could see, a twisting hallway that hadn't been there before. Light poured from the end of it, something I hadn't seen since stepping inside this cursed asylum. Behind me, the room caved in. The throne crumbled, the walls imploded. I ran harder than I ever had before. As I neared the end of the hallway, the pressure around me lessened. The whispers faded. The air grew lighter, and then I burst through the doorway and collapsed into the cold night. I was outside. I turned, gasping for air, my vision blurring. Blackridge Asylum was gone. There were no ruins, no crumbling walls, just an empty, desolate field where it had once stood. I touched my chest. The wound was still there, but it had stopped bleeding. The glass shard was gone. I was alive, and I was free. Or so I thought, because as I stood there, staring at the void where Blackridge had once been, a single door remained, standing upright in the empty field, the seventh door, and as I turned to leave, I heard it. A faint knock.